Я думаю, проблема в том, что постмодернизм в значительной степени изжил себя. Дэвид Фостер Уоллес известен как один из самых важных писателей новейшей истории. Он порицал негативное влияние постмодернизма на свое поколение. Постмодернизм – очень разносторонний термин, используемый для анализа нашего мира, появившийся в 50-60-х годах. Он отверг великие нарративы, которые существовали в модернизме, такие как единственный истинный Бог, история есть прогресс и мир на земле. В постмодернистской мысли нет научной, философской или религиозной истины, которая бы объяснила бы все для всех. Для этого ей не хватает оптимизма. Вместо этого все понимается на микроуровне. Знания истины являются контекстуальными и сконструированными. Реальность проявляется только через наши интерпретации того, чего мы хотим от мира индивидуально. Таким образом, постмодернизм характеризуется самоотсылающейся реальностью. Например, когда персонаж знает, что он персонаж романа или фильма. Моральным релятивизмом, цинизмом и иронией. Помня это, вернемся к Уоллесу. Опять. И проблема, тем не менее, состоит в том, что большинство фишек постмодернизма – ирония, цинизм, непочтительность – теперь являются частью всего того, что разлагает саму культуру, не так ли? Наибольшее беспокойство Уоллеса вызвала доминирующая культурная сила телевидения, которая, по его мнению, стала перенасыщена особенностями постмодерна. Ответ телевидения на глупые и чрезмерно сентиментальные ситкомы был ироничный. ТВ-шоу стали критиковать себя за то, что они были тупыми ТВ-шоу. Этого не может быть. Мы должны посмотреть этот фильм, чувак. Да ну нахрен, наверняка ничего хорошего. Картман, какого черта? Ты же любишь Терренса и Филиппа. Да, только анимация дерьмо. Трудно критиковать шоу, которое критикует само себя. Шоу стали более самоотсылающимися и самоуничижительными. В общем, они ни к чему не относились серьезно. И эта проблема волновала Уоллеса. Ирония не имеет искупительных качеств сама по себе. Она может указывать на проблемы и противоречия, но не предлагает никакого решения. Это похоже на то, когда мятежник свергнул тирана для того, чтобы стать более лучшим тираном. Возьмем, к примеру, Сайнфелд, иронический ситком. Каждый персонаж имеет очень человеческие проблемы, но они представлены как неразрешимые. Иронический метод прослеживается в рекламе постоянно. Здесь 20 объявлений высмеивают себя за то, что они объявления. «Привет, я актер. Я заплатил $8000, чтобы сказать вам, насколько велик Норнет по сравнению с другими банками». К Уоллесу. Невозмутимое самоуничижение телевидения и деконструкция нашей культуры. Идея, что все сфабриковано, была губительна для души. Модное, циничное превосходство над сентиментальностью на самом деле какой-то страх быть настоящим человеком. Он думал, что мы найдем решение в сдвиге общего тона телевидения, от циничной иронии к искренности. И без сомнения этот крайний сдвиг происходит в некоторых сферах поп-культуры и имел место в течение прошлого десятилетия. Это связано отчасти с самим Дэвидом Уоллесом и, вероятно, с общим культурным отказом от цинизма в целом.
Чтение Дэвида Фостера Уоллеса открывало глаза. Есть писатели, тема которых опыт, полученный вдали от дома. Дэвид участвовал в сафари, изучал итальянскую кухню, писал о войне. Уоллес возмущал сонный аквариум нашей жизни, нашего телевидения, магазинов, политических кампаний. Писатели, способные на это, такие как Селлинджер и Фицджеральд, создают нерасторжимую связь с читателями. В его книгах мы искали не сюжета, не информации, а особого опыта. Ощущение того, что на какое-то время мы стали Дэвидом Фостером Уоллесом.
Это была сознательная попытка не идти проторенной дорожкой. Хотя в итоге ты все равно становишься собой.
I know that Wittgenstein believed that the most serious and profound problems and questions and issues could be discussed only in the form of jokes. I mean, I know in U.S. lit, there's a tradition from about the 50s and 60s called black humor, which is a very kind of sardonic, sad type of humor. I'm grasping for something interesting to say in response. I think probably sometimes it can be, and sometimes it isn't. There are forms of humor that offer escapes from pain, and there are forms of humor that transfigure pain.
Because in your books...
Does that make any sense?
Yeah,
okay.
Perfectly.
Okay.
I mean...
Now the perspiration starts. Okay.
It's,
It would help. You know what would help me? Tell me what you think. Like, if we do this as a conversation, it will be easier for me.
Yeah, sure. You know, I wrote my master thesis about Thomas Bernhard, and in Thomas Bernhard there's a theory that, you know, he had this lung sickness, so he couldn't breathe all his life, and his life was very hard for him. And also he hated Austria where he lived, and he thought they were all Nazis and was all this Catholic fascism, and he was just hating everything. But then out of that he developed this really kind of strange sense of humor. So his novels are very dark, but at the same time for me, very witty, and also this humor comes in some sort of music and all that. And I just wanted to know if you think that is true, that, you know, the kind of sense of humor you like, you know, comes out of this bitterness and sadness, and or if this is a cliche. Sometimes it's also a cliche, you know, it's like this tragic comic. And
the answer for myself is I don't know. I know that I know that that very often humor is a response to things that are difficult. In the U.S. there's a strange situation where, in some respects, humor and irony are political responses, and they're redemptive. And in another sense, particularly in popular entertainment, irony and a kind of dark humor can become a way of it's pretending to protest when it really isn't. Someone once called irony the song of a bird that has come to love its cage. And even though it sings about not liking the cage, it really likes it in there. It can be so that it can be both a wake-up call and an anesthetic. And the difference in the U.S. now is very tricky and very complicated, it seems to me.
And what would you think is true for your books? I mean, for me, they have all this. They are about very serious questions, and they are often very sad. But at the same time, you get this sense of humor in there somehow.
I'm not often all that aware of stuff that's really funny in the book. In the American version of Infinite Jest, I set out to write a sad book, and when people liked it and told me that the thing they liked about it was that it was so funny, it was just very surprising. It's the other strange thing about humor. I teach school and I teach literature, and some of what I teach is Kafka, and there's a story about Kafka that in some of Kafka's most horrific stories, his neighbors would complain because he would be laughing so hard late at night as he wrote these stories. He found them very, very funny. And there are things in them that are funny, but I don't know that many people would understand laughing so hard that your neighbors would complain. So there's something, it's probably difficult to talk to a writer about the humor or sadness or something in his or her own work because our sense of it tends to be very different from readers.
Yeah, but there was one interview you gave. I forgot which media it was, but you said when you began writing Infinite Jest, you wanted to write something about sadness. So sadness was something that really belonged to this project. So could you describe what you?
It was a while ago. The easiest way to talk about it would be that for the upper middle class in the U.S., particularly younger people, things are often materially very comfortable, and there's also often a great sadness and emptiness, and it's difficult to think about and difficult to come up with answers in the abstract. And I think I had started that book after a couple of people, not close friends, but people I knew who were my age had committed suicide. And there was just a it just became obvious that something was going on. And so I know that impulse was part of starting the book. The book is so long though, and took so long to write, that it's almost hard to remember the impulses at the beginning, because everything sort of changes. I mean, it's something you live with for years and years, rather than something that you just have an idea or a feeling and you just do. I think one of the ideas of the book is that there's a particular ethos in U.S. culture, especially in entertainment and marketing culture, that very much appeals to people as individuals, that you don't have to be devoted or subservient to anything else. There is no larger good than your own good and your own happiness. And that in the book, as best I can recall, characters who become drug addicts, there is a form, the root in English of addict is the Latin addicere, which means religious devotion. It was an attribute of beginning monks, I think. There's an element in the book in which various people are living out something that I think is true, which is that we all worship, and we all have a religious impulse. We can choose to an extent what we worship, but the myth that we worship nothing and give ourselves away to nothing is simply sets us up to give ourselves away to something different. For instance, pleasure, or drugs, or the idea of having a lot of money and being able to buy nice stuff. Or in the tennis academy, it's somewhat different. It's devotion to an athletic pursuit that requires a certain amount of sacrifice and discipline, but is nevertheless an individual sport, and one's trying to get ahead as an individual. I doubt this makes very much sense, but whatever the conditions of hopelessness you're talking about, at least in Infinite Jest, have to do, I think, with an American idea, and not a universal one, but one that I think kids get exposed to very early, that you are the most important, and what you want is the most important, and that your job in life is to gratify your own desires. That's a little crude to say it that way, but in fact it's something of the ideology here, it's certainly the ideology that's perpetrated by television and advertising and entertainment, and the economy thrives on it.
And what happens when this ideology becomes... Oh, there.
Oh, am I? Oh,
Some
God, sorry.
Gotta switch this battery up.
Shit, I was halfway lucid for a second there, too. And it probably didn't come through?
No, it was fine.
I was feeling lucid.
I promise it was fine.
Maybe a little closer.
Yeah, I went out for just the last question very well. But it's kind of hard because he moves in and out.
Yeah, okay.
It's,
I move in and out?
oh, yeah.
You know, the thing is, the background is not too pretty, of course, and that's why we're not showing...
I'm sorry.
No, that's
no,
cool.
that's okay.
No, because you're pontificating.
Hey, thank you.
You have to...
There's a
in
nice
very
word.
deep,
Thank you.
spiritual way.
Uh-huh.
Okay, which is completely screwing me. Kidding. I'm kidding. So you are. You're I can tell you're very
Twitchy.
reflective.
I'm sorry?
You're very reflective.
Well, these are hard questions.
Oh, yeah.
Particularly when it's about something you did like 7 years ago.
Oh, okay. I just shoot the pictures.
Yeah. I would trade places with you at this moment.
Anytime.
What do you think does this ideology lead you when children are told from the beginning everything that counts is your own happiness and your own pursuit of, you know, of satisfaction?
Well, of course, nobody tells you. I mean, mom and dad don't sit you down and say this. This is something very subtle and is delivered by a great many messages. In just conversationally, do you get what I'm talking about? I rather doubt that Europeans' idea of America is very different from this. I mean, this is one enormous engine and temple of self-gratification and self-advancement, and in some ways it works very, very well. In other ways, it doesn't work all that well, because at least for me, it seems as if there are whole other parts of me that need to worry about things larger than me, that don't get nourished in that system.
And here you are.
И вот ты рекламируешь свой популярный роман.
That's not bad.
Неплохо.
Дэвид, это здорово, но это не
real.
настоящее.
Also in this interview I read, there was also this that you said, well, you wanted to write something about a generation. I mean, you weren't sure if you were right about this generation, but you somehow had that feeling that your generation was in that kind of trouble.
Well, my memory is one of the reasons for setting the book in the future was that I'm now 40, so I was born in the early '60s, and to an extent, I think my generation tends to think of itself as children still, and as people with parents, and I remember wanting to do something about what would be the situation of our children, so kind of the next generation.
And this childlike thing has this also something. There's one story and interviews with hideous men where the depressed person is always talking about the wounded inner child. Is that something that belongs together, or is this?
Language like that, the wounded inner child, the inner pain, is part of a kind of pop psychological movement in the United States that is a sort of popular Freudianism that has its own paradox, which is that the more we are taught to list and resent the things of which we were deprived as children, the more we live in that anger and frustration, and the more we remain children. I mean, that's a very simple way of putting it, but I think the character in that story is sort of a compendium of kind of all the worst and most painful features of the popular psychology movement in the U.S. And I don't know whether there's any analog to that in Western Europe or not.
Yeah, I think there is actually. And when you said that, I mean, I find that too in Europe, that there's this reluctance to really be grown up and to live life on life's terms. So, I mean, what should this generation, which is not able to grow up, do about it?
Let me insert one thing, which I'll bet you've noticed from talking to writers, is that most of the stuff that we think we're writing about in books is very difficult to talk about straight out, question and answer, and in some sense, it probably can't be talked about directly, and that's why people make up stories about it. This is all a big defense, because I feel like what I'm saying is so simple and so reductive. To the extent that I understand it, being what you call grown up isn't a lot of fun a lot of the time. There are things you have to do. There are things you want to do that you can't do for a variety of reasons. And I think for young people in America, there are very mixed messages from the culture. There's a streak of moralism in American life that extols the virtues of being grown up and having a family and being a responsible citizen. But there's also the sense of do what you want, gratify your appetites, because when I'm a corporation, appealing to the parts of you that are selfish and self-centered and want to have fun all the time is the best way to sell you things, right? And the point that emerges from that is that it's, I think, one more example of the American economic and cultural systems that work very well in terms of selling people products and keeping the economy thriving, do not work as well when it comes to educating children or helping us help each other know how to live and to be happy. If that word means anything, clearly it means something different from whatever I want to do. I want to take this cup and throw it right now. I have every right to. I should. You know, I mean, that we've seen it. We see it with children. That's not happiness. That feeling of having to obey every impulse and gratify every desire it seems to me to be a strange kind of slavery. Nobody talks about it as such, though. It talks about freedom of choice, and you have the right to have things, and spend this much money and you can have this stuff. Again, saying it this way, it sounds to me very crude and very simple, but that's sort of the way.
Yeah, no, I don't think so. But I mean, once you're in your,
does this make any sense to you?
Absolutely,
okay.
and I'm not lying or something. I will tell you.
But I mean, but you've spent time in the U.S. Is this some?
Yeah, but I think it's not only a problem in the U.S. because everything that happens here somehow is copied by by people in Germany, and there it's also this impulse that you only have to do what makes you happy and forget about all the others, and you don't want to be with boring people who need you, and that's not attractive and all that. So it's it's more or less the same thing. So it makes sense to me, of course.
And it works very well as a system for running an economy and keeping goods produced and sold, and it works wonderfully. The ways in which it doesn't work are much more difficult to talk about.
So what would I mean? Yeah, you said it would. But when speaking of that, where doesn't it work?
Here's what's really interesting, and I don't know if you can translate this. Talking about this now, I feel ashamed, because my saying all this sounds to me like an older person saying this, like a person lecturing, which in American culture sets me up to be ridiculed. It would be very easy to make fun of what I'm saying. It'd be very, very easy to make fun of what I'm saying, and I can hear in my head a voice making fun of this stuff as I'm saying it. And this is the kind of paradox, I think, of what it is to be a halfway intelligent American right now, and probably also a Western European, is that there are things we know are right and good and would be better for us to do, but constantly it's like, yeah, but it's so much funnier and nicer to go do something else, and who cares, and it's all bullshit anyway. And, sorry.
No, but it's the same dilemma actually in Germany, with people wanting to say something and knowing at the same time it is this intellectual stereotype, but on the other hand, you can't forget about it. I mean, and
one of the things it causes is tension and unhappiness in people. I don't think it's very complicated, and I don't think I've named the only reason for it. The paradox is that sort of tension and complication and conflict in people also makes them very easy to market to, because I can say to you, feeling uneasy, life feels empty. Well, here's something you can buy or something you can go do. It makes us. It makes for the economics term is inelasticity of demand. I demand all the time, no matter what the price of it is. And it works really well in an economic way. Emotionally, spiritually, in terms of citizenship, in terms of feeling like a meaningful part even of this country. Forget the world, you know. And I'm sure the U.S. government's sort of arrogance and disdain for the rest of the world is unpleasant, but it's also a natural extension of certain cultural messages we send ourselves about ourselves that work very well in some ways and make us very rich and very powerful. It's all complicated.
So, yeah, we are somehow addicted to having fun, and even, you know, in so-called serious literature, it's that, you know, you don't want to make this effort anymore. Books who are serious also have to be very entertaining, and you don't want to be bored, and that's I mean, I think 20, 30 years ago, you could still read a book, and it would be this kind of work to do, but you wouldn't think, well, I have to be entertained all the time, and then. So how do we get out of this dilemma when everything, even for intellectuals, has to be entertaining and not boring? And
I don't know that I'd agree with the last part of what you said. There's a real split. It's interesting that you went and interviewed Crichton, because there's a real split in U.S. literature between commercial literature. Novels like that Crichton writes, Stephen King, Tom Clancy, who are the other big, Grisham, the law guy, some of which are really pretty good, but they're and they make a great deal of money, and there's a whole lot of demand for them. And then there is still, and I think it's probably like this in well, it's probably not quite. There's probably more demand for serious books in Europe, but here there's a small pocket of probably, I don't know, 500,000, say 1 million readers, who, many of whom are from the upper classes and have good educations and have been taught the pleasures of hard work in reading or music or art, and like that. So. I mean, when you're talking to me, you're talking to somebody who doesn't have very much power in the culture, and who's not very important except in a fairly small. I don't know what the analog would be. It would be something like maybe contemporary classical music in the U.S., which there are people who enjoy it and listen to it, partly because of training and partly because they're disposed to be willing to do a certain amount more work reading it. But compared to popular music and rock and roll and hip hop and stuff, classical music is nothing. I mean, economically or commercially, or in terms of how many people have heard of it, or how much an influence it has on the culture. So, and for me personally, I don't know that it's really ever been all that different. I think probably American education used to be a little bit better and a little bit more difficult, and children had no choice but to realize that there were certain things that were hard and involved a certain amount of drudgery that were actually very satisfying at the end of it. But for the most part, I think in the U.S., people who've been doing, quote, serious stuff, which is harder and stranger, have always played to a much smaller audience. In terms of what can be done about the dilemma, first of all, I'm wondering who would care what I think, and second, I'm not sure, and third, what do you think? I mean, you live in the same atmosphere I do.
Yeah, I think it's really a problem, because in Germany we have this TV literary expert, and you call him the literary pope. So he's the pope of literature. And people think he has a very good niveau of everything, and he really knows when he says the book is good, the book is good.
Who is this guy?
His name is Marcel Reich-Ranitzky. Maybe you heard of him. And he's a very funny guy, and he's maybe 80 years old or something. And he has always this verdict on the book, so the book is shit. Or
He's part of your show? He's part of...
No. But he is just a figure in German culture. But at the same time, he always wants, what he doesn't want a book to be is boring. No, by no means boring. And at the same time, he really understands a lot about books, and he's really a good reader. But by saying all the time, well, things are not supposed to be boring, and I mean, I think that's really a mistake, and it's getting taken for granted. And I feel sometimes I also have this feeling that I don't want to be bored, but at the other side, I see that it's not the option. I mean, I don't know, it's not right. I somehow have this feeling, even if it sounds stupid.
No, it's, I mean, there's a difference, though, I think, between being mildly bored, but then there's another kind of boredom that I think you're talking about, which is reading requires sitting alone by yourself in a quiet room. And I have friends, intelligent friends, who don't like to read because it's not just bored. There's an almost dread that comes up, I think, here about having to be alone and having to be quiet. And you see that when you walk in. When you walk into most public spaces in America, it isn't quiet anymore. They pipe music through. And the music's easy to make fun of because it's usually really horrible music, but it seems significant that we don't want things to be quiet ever anymore. And to me, I don't know that I could defend it, but that seems to me to have something to do with when you feel like the purpose of your life is to gratify yourself and get things for yourself and go all the time. There's this other part of you that's the same part that can kind of is almost hungry for silence and quiet and thinking really hard about the same thing for maybe half an hour instead of 30 seconds, that doesn't get fed at all. And it makes itself felt in the body in a kind of dread in here. And I don't know whether that makes a whole lot of sense, but I think it's true that here in the U.S. every year the culture gets more and more hostile. And I don't mean hostile like angry, just it becomes more and more difficult to ask people to read or to look at a piece of art for an hour or to listen to a piece of music that's complicated and that takes work to understand because, well, there are a lot of reasons, but particularly now in computer and internet culture, everything is so fast. And the faster things go, the more we feed that part of ourselves, but don't feed the part of ourselves that likes quiet, that can live in quiet, that can live without any kind of stimulation.
Я написал книгу о том, насколько легко мы сходим с какого-то важного пути, благодаря тем соблазнам, которые предоставляет нам культура. Что, если я стану пародией на свою книгу?
I was just having this very, I have to admit, very simplistic notion that what we wanna reach, what most people want to reach is the state of thoughtlessness, not having to think anymore. And I just wanted to know if there are several ways to reach this state of mind, and if, watching entertainment all the time and
Are you talking about entertainment in general or the entertainment in the book?
In the book, and also, when I turn the TV on here, it really drives me crazy, but it's because it's always, I see a little piece, and then it's commercial break, and then they show me something, and then I'm supposed to watch the longer part, but I've already seen the longer part, so it's no use of doing that. So it drives me somehow mad, and this whole creates this kind of state of, if I do it every day, 7 hours maybe,
Well, particularly if you have a remote control, see, when that happens, you go to a different channel. And if you don't like that channel, you go to a different channel. And one of the reasons I can't own a TV is I've started having this thing where I become convinced there's something really good on another channel and that I'm missing it. And so instead of watching, I'm scanning anxiously back and forth for this thing that I think I want that I don't even know what it is. And so I don't know whether German... Well, this is probably not a good thing to say on television, but I don't know whether a similar thing happens in Germany, but it's very stressful now. And what it is too much good stuff combined with my sick little head that thinks there's always something a little better on the next thing, and all you have to do, you don't have to get up now to change it. That was the problem. When it became easy, you just had to move your thumb and change it. That's when we were screwed.
So do you think it's
90% of this is going to be cut out, right?
Yeah, sure.
Yes. Okay.
I mean, not because I like it, but because there's of course
because it's not going to make any sense. Yes, right.
Yeah.
Right.
So do you think that entertainment that everybody? I mean, is that entertainment something we have to fight against?
See, it's a strange question because who would say entertainment is bad? I mean, I wouldn't say entertainment is bad. But a model of life in which I have a right to be entertained all the time seems to me not to be a promising one, right? So, and this won't translate, but of course one of the insidious things about it is that entertainment is so goddamn entertaining. So like imagine this show were running on American TV, and I were sitting in this hotel watching it. Okay, we've got this pointy-headed, nerdy guy talking about this stuff, or I've got Pamela Anderson running on a beach, or a hilarious comedy. Which one am I going to watch? When I'm saying, there's no. If fighting against entertainment is even required, how does one do it unless? Well, there are two options. One is you direct the attack only to people who are willing to listen to the complexity, but those aren't the people who are enslaved by entertainment anyway. Or you find some way to make the attack on entertainment entertaining, in which case you've been captured by the very thing you're fighting against. It's very, very strange.
Yeah, that's exactly the dilemma.
Yes.
That's exactly it.
Главный вопрос в книге – это вопрос «Почему?». Почему я смотрю все это дерьмо? Она не о дерьме, а обо мне. Почему я делаю это? Когда я говорю об этом, это звучит очень туманно и примитивно.
Нет, вовсе это не туманно и не примитивно.
У меня нет ни диагноза, ни системы лечения того, почему мы... Говоря «мы», я имею в виду таких, как ты и я. В основном белые, верхнего среднего класса, хорошо образованные, с интересной работой, сидящие в дорогих креслах, за самыми современными и дорогими электронными штуками. Почему же нам так пусто и безрадостно?
Типа галеты с телеком.
Я не говорю, что смотреть телек — это плохо, это трата времени. Это ничуть не хуже, чем заниматься мастурбацией. Это приятное занятие на несколько минут, но если делать это 20 раз в день... Если у тебя главное сексуальное отношение с рукой, то тут что-то не так.
Но при мастурбации хоть что-то происходит, да? Это лучше.
Я буду выглядеть придурком, если ты напечатаешь это.
Нет, я не буду, но ты можешь говорить.
Да, ты делаешь движение рукой, когда дрочишь, но на самом деле ты прокручиваешь фильм в голове. У тебя возникает отношение с нереальным лицом ради неврологической реакции. Через 15-10 лет с развитием интернета, когда виртуальная реальность, порнография станет реальностью, нам нужен будет какой-то механизм внутри нас, который будет отключать чистое удовольствие. Не знаю, как ты, а я собираюсь свалить с этой планеты.
Почему?
Технологии становятся все лучше и лучше. И становится все проще и проще, все удобнее и удобнее, все приятнее и приятнее сидеть одному с образами на экране, данными нам людьми, которые не любят нас, а хотят наши деньги. И это нормально, в небольших дозах. Но если это твое основное блюдо, тогда ты умрешь.
Да брось.
В каком-то важном смысле ты умрешь.
Правда несет свободу после того, как расправится с тобой. Дэвид Фостер Уоллес.